Unworthy of Love. Chapter 1. Shattered Reflections. Alexis sat in her dimly lit apartment, staring at the cracked photo frame on her cluttered desk. The edges of the glass had splintered long ago, yet she never replaced it. It was as broken as she felt. Inside the frame was a picture of her and Lily, her younger sister, taken years ago, before the accident that changed everything. Lily's wide, carefree smile beamed up at her, a reminder of who she used to be before Alexis ruined her life. The memory of that night still haunted her, clinging to her like a shadow she could never escape. She had been driving, one hand on the wheel, the other scrolling through messages on her phone. A split-second mistake, a moment of carelessness, and suddenly the world had flipped. Literally. The car rolled, metal crunching, glass shattering, and then silence. When Alexis woke up in the hospital, bruised but intact, she had prayed it was all a nightmare. But then she saw her parents' faces, drained and grief-stricken, and she knew the truth before they spoke a single word. Lily would never walk again. Guilt gnawed at her every day. It was her fault. No matter how many times people told her it had been an accident, she knew better. It wasn't just an accident. It was her failure, her recklessness. She didn't deserve forgiveness. She certainly didn't deserve happiness. Her life had been a routine of self-inflicted punishment ever since. Work, home, repeat. No laughter, no friends, no indulgences. She didn't deserve joy, didn't deserve kindness, especially not from someone like Ethan. Ethan! He was the only person at work who tried to break through the walls she had built so carefully around herself. The others had long given up trying to befriend her, but Ethan was stubborn. He was the kind of person who carried the sun in his pocket, always warm, always bright, always irritatingly persistent. "You should come to the team dinner tonight," he said, leaning casually against her desk. His voice was light, but there was an undercurrent of something else. Concern, maybe? Pity? She didn't need either. Alexis barely looked up from her screen. "I'm busy." "You always say that," he replied, unfazed. "What exactly keeps you so busy?" "Work." Work doesn't count if you're just using it as an excuse to avoid people." Her fingers froze over the keyboard and a sharp pang of irritation shot through her. Who was he to dissect her life like that? To dig into wounds she had no intention of exposing? "I'm not avoiding anyone," she said, keeping her voice even. Ethan gave her a knowing look. "Right, and I'm a professional ballerina." Despite herself, Alexis felt the corner of her mouth twitch. She shut it down before it could become anything resembling a smile. "Go to your dinner, Ethan. I'm sure everyone will have a great time without me." He sighed, but didn't push further. Instead, he leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "You can't hide forever, Alexis." His words hit deeper than she wanted to admit. Hide. That's exactly what she had been doing. Hiding from life, from people, from herself. That night, as she sat alone in her apartment, her dinner growing cold beside her, Ethan's words echoed in her mind. You can't hide forever. But wasn't that the safest option? If she stayed in the shadows, no one else could get hurt. No one else would suffer because of her. Her phone buzzed. A message from Lily. "Hey, Lex, just checking in. You okay?" Alexis swallowed the lump in her throat. Lily always checked in, as if their roles had somehow reversed. Alexis was supposed to be the big sister, the one who protected her. And yet, Lily was the one offering comfort, as if she hadn't been the one robbed of her future. She hesitated before typing a response. "I'm fine, just tired." A reply came almost instantly. "You sure?" Number not at all. "But what good would saying that do?" "Yeah, get some rest. Love you." "Love you too." Alexis set the phone down and pressed her fingers against her temples. The weight in her chest never left, but tonight it felt heavier. She didn't deserve Lily's love, didn't deserve Ethan's kindness, didn't deserve anything at all. Chapter 2. Breaking Down Walls. Against her better judgment, Alexis started spending more time with Ethan. It wasn't intentional at first. He had a way of making her feel included, slipping into her routine like he belonged there. He never pushed too hard, never demanded more than she was willing to give, but he was always there, patient and steady. At lunch, he would casually drop a sandwich onto her desk without asking if she wanted one. If she tried to decline, he'd just grin and say, "I got two by accident. Guess you'll have to help me out." When she worked late, he lingered, claiming he just happened to have extra work too, but she suspected it was just an excuse to make sure she wasn't alone. And sometimes, when she let herself relax, she'd catch herself laughing at something he said, a real laugh, one she didn't have to force. For the first time in years, she felt a flicker of something unfamiliar, hope, but hope was dangerous. Every time she and Ethan grew closer, Alexis found a way to sabotage it. She canceled plans at the last minute, claiming she was too busy. When he texted, she sometimes ignored him for hours, even though she wanted to reply. And when they did spend time together, she would pick small fights over nothing, pushing him away before he had the chance to leave first. One evening, after a particularly tense argument, Ethan finally reached his breaking point. "Why do you keep pushing me away?" he asked, his voice tight with frustration. They stood outside her apartment building, the cool night air thick with unspoken words. Alexis crossed her arms, avoiding his gaze. "I don't know what you're talking about." Ethan let out a dry laugh. "Come on, Alexis. You cancel plans, you shut down when I try to talk to you, and tonight you spent the whole dinner finding reasons to pick a fight with me. Just tell me what's going on." Her throat tightened. Panic clawed at her chest. She wanted to tell him, to let the words spill out and finally be free of them, but the thought of being vulnerable made her stomach twist. Finally, she blurted, "Because you'll leave eventually. Everyone does." The words hung between them, raw and heavy. Ethan exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand over his jaw. His usual easygoing expression was replaced with something serious, something pained. "I'm not going anywhere, Alexis," he said softly, "but you have to let me in." She wanted to believe him, but deep down she wasn't sure she could. The next morning, Alexis woke up to a text that sent her stomach into knots. "Lily, I'm coming to town next week. We need to talk." Her hands trembled as she stared at the screen. She hadn't seen Lily in years, hadn't even spoken to her beyond the occasional short, impersonal text. Guilt burned in her chest like acid. What did Lily want to say? Did she hate her? Would she ever forgive her? The thoughts spiraled, dragging Alexis into a familiar darkness. She closed her eyes, gripping the phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. She wasn't ready. She'd never be ready. But whether she wanted to or not, she would have to face the past. Chapter 3. The Weight of Forgiveness. The air inside the restaurant was warm, filled with the soft hum of conversation and the clinking of silverware against plates. Alexis sat stiffly at the table, her hands curled into tight fists on her lap. Across from her, Lily stirred her tea absent-mindedly, her expression unreadable. Ethan sat beside Alexis, his presence steady, his gaze flicking between the two sisters, as if sensing the tension between them. Alexis had dreaded this dinner all week. When Lily had first texted her, she had considered every excuse to cancel, but Ethan had convinced her to come. "You can't run forever," he had said. She knew he was right, but that didn't make this any easier. Dinner passed in a blur of small talk, safe, meaningless words that barely scratched the surface of what needed to be said. But just as dessert arrived, Lily took a deep breath and spoke the words that would change everything. "I'm moving back to town," she said, setting her fork down carefully. Her eyes locked onto Alexis's, searching for a reaction. "And I want you to be part of my life again." Alexis's breath caught in her throat. She felt Ethan tense slightly beside her, as if bracing for her response. "I've forgiven you, Alexis," Lily continued, her voice steady, but full of emotion. "It's time you forgive yourself." The words hit like a punch to the gut. Alexis felt the air leave her lungs, her heart pounding in her chest. Forgive myself? The restaurant suddenly felt too small, the walls closing in. 100 memories flooded her mind. The screech of tires, the shattered windshield, the sound of Lily's scream, the sterile beeping of hospital machines. The moment she saw her sister in that wheelchair for the first time, the look in Lily's eyes that Alexis had convinced herself was disappointment, resentment. Her throat tightened. She shook her head, barely aware that she was speaking aloud. I can't. Lily's brows knitted together. Alexis? No. Her voice was sharper this time, tinged with panic. You don't understand. Ethan reached for her hand, his fingers warm against her cold skin. His touch steadied her, but only slightly. You're not the same person you were back then, he said gently. You've grown. You've changed. Alexis pulled her hand away. You don't get it, she said, her voice breaking. I don't deserve this. I don't deserve either of you. Ethan exhaled, his gaze unwavering. That's not your decision to make. He hesitated, then added, I love you, Alexis, and I'm not going anywhere. The words sent a shock through her. She lifted her eyes to his, searching for any sign that he was lying, that he would take it back. But he didn't. He meant it. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe it. Falling action and resolution. In the weeks that followed, something inside Alexis shifted. It wasn't sudden or dramatic. There was no moment where everything magically fell into place. But she started trying. She began therapy, even though the thought of unpacking years of guilt terrified her. She reconnected with Lily, slowly allowing herself to be part of her sister's life again. They took small steps, grabbing coffee, exchanging real conversations instead of just surface-level pleasantries. And, little by little, Alexis let Ethan in. It wasn't easy. There were still moments of doubt, still nights where she lay awake, fighting the old voices in her head that told her she wasn't worthy of love. But for the first time, she wasn't fighting alone. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Alexis and Ethan sat on her balcony. The space that had once been cluttered and lifeless was now clean and warm, bathed in soft, golden light. A gentle breeze carried the scent of blooming jasmine from the streets below. She turned to him, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. Thank you, she said softly. Ethan raised an eyebrow. For what? For not giving up on me. His expression softened. He reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. You're worth it, Alexis, he murmured. Always have been. She inhaled deeply, feeling something inside her begin to loosen, the heavy, suffocating guilt that had kept her prisoner for so long. She wasn't healed, she wasn't fixed, but she was moving forward. And for the first time in years, she felt something she thought she had lost forever: hope.